Good morning everyone, it's Charles here from Charles N Photography. Today we're at Dolly's Rocks on the north side of Brisbane. It's about 9:30 in the morning. It's a bit of an overcast day and this is actually quite good to actually do a time-lapse because we've got clouds moving about the sky. So today's video I'm going to show people who are new to this photography how to set up their cameras to shoot a time-lapse. Now if you're unfamiliar with what a time-lapse is, basically a time-lapse is you're shooting a couple of hundred photos for a minimum and you're going to turn these into a movie. You can do this in Adobe Lightroom. I also use another program which is called LRT Time-Lapse. Now it's a paid program but you can use it for free until about 400 photos. So if you go over 400 photos, you'll have to pay the paid version. It's definitely worth getting the paid version if you really get into this, but I'll put a link down in the description where you can download this program and use it for free at the start just to get you to see if you like it. You can use Adobe Lightroom, which I'll edit this time-lapse that we're going to do this morning in, but I'll also show you in another video how I've edited the same time-lapse sets of photos into a time-lapse using LRT time-lapse. The benefit of LRT time-lapse is that it will actually blend all the photos together so there's no chopping and changing through the photos. So today we've got a fairly average sky. We're not going to go into a sunset or anything like that, but if we were going from bright daylight to a sunset, just using Adobe Lightroom, you'll actually see the gradients as the light fades. Whereas if we were using LRT time-lapse, that program will actually help you sort of blend away all the photos. So what do we need for shooting a time-lapse? A camera, digital SLR. I've got my Nikon D7500. You don't need an ultra wide angle lens. I'm actually using my Tokina 11-20, but because there's not a lot in front of me, I've actually zoomed in a little bit to this boat that's in front of us here, and I'm shooting at 20 mils. And this is a crop sensor camera. What you do need though is a sturdy tripod. Now if your tripod isn't that sturdy and it's one of these where you've got the sort of triangular frame on it, put a weight or something like that in the middle because you're probably hearing there's a bit of wind noise around. We've got about 15-20 knots of wind blowing here today, and if this is a flimsy tripod, you're going to get shake in the camera, and this is something you cannot get rid of your time-lapse, and all you're going to see is jittering like this, and it's very uncomfortable to watch. So a sturdy tripod, or weigh your tripod down. Like this is my Manfrotto Pro 55. It's about 1.5–2 kilos in weight. It doesn't go anywhere. But my mobile phone is actually connected at the moment to a Vanguard tripod. It's a little bit lighter, but it's actually got a hook in the middle, on the middle, and I've actually got a piece of steel that I normally hook up to the center, or I just grab my backpack and hang it from there just to give the tripod some stability. So the one thing that you do need is you've got to make sure that your camera is horizontal. Now when I did the video about how to shoot a thunderstorm, I talked about, I'll take this off, I talked about using one of these little spirit levelers if your camera doesn't come with like an artificial horizon. The D7000 series and the Nikons all have the artificial horizon, so it's quite easy. I just turn on the live view and I set the artificial horizon so that I know that my horizon is straight. If you're shooting a couple of hundred photos, sometimes more for a time-lapse, the last thing you want to do is grab all these frames and spin them around. So make sure that your horizon's straight. So if your camera doesn't come with an artificial horizon, you can't see it, get one of these. They're only a couple of bucks on eBay. And I'll put a link to it in the description below as well. The other thing that you've got to remember is when we're shooting a time-lapse, a normal photo is 6x4. But when you're shooting a time-lapse, it's actually going into 9x16, so wide angle, just like I'm actually recording on my phone now. So you're going to lose some of the bottom and some of the top of your photo. Think about that very carefully when you're actually framing. Now, you can actually move this rectangle up or down, so plan how you're going to do this. In setting up your camera, what I do is for a day like this, I let the camera handle the aperture. So it's an aperture priority. I've set the ISO to as low as possible, and that is so that I don't get very fast shutter speeds. I don't want a very fast shutter speed today. So I've taken it off auto ISO. You don't really want to set on auto ISO. So set to manual ISO, ISO 100. Your aperture, you don't need to go too high. The thing is, if you go too high, if you've got small dust spots on the camera, which are quite easy to have, you'll actually see them come up on the photo. Now, if we were just doing single images and you get a little dust spot and all that, that's fairly easy to take out of your camera using Lightroom with the healing tool. But if you're doing a time lapse like this and you've got a couple of hundred photos and you've got clouds coming along and you're using that healing tool, it's, unless you go through every single photo, if you hit it once, the clouds move. So you're actually going to see that little dot where you've actually healed. The little spot is actually going to be changing around. I wouldn't shoot any higher than about f11. And this is what I've actually set my camera on today. So I've set at f11, my ISO is at 100. Now white balance. You can shoot auto white balance if you want, but I prefer to keep the white balance consistent, especially during the day, so that the camera doesn't sort of decide halfway through, oh, it's getting a bit cloudy, I'll just change the white balance on you. And then when you actually start editing, you'll go like, oh, the clouds have gone from grey to orange. You know, so like set it to a manual white balance. This camera here, I can set the kelvins to a manual white balance, and my white balance today to 5,200, which is basically daylight. If you can't set your white balance to manual white balance on your camera, then use one of the presets. And the best preset is daylight or sunny. Depends on whether it is a Sony, Nikon, Canon, or whatever. Now we're going to make sure that the camera is leveled up, and I'm going to frame the shot. So I'm actually using live view. I'll zoom a little bit in so I can actually see my shot. Now that looks fairly good. Okay, I'm very happy with this. I'll take it off live view. Now I'm using my histogram here to see that I'm not blowing out the photo. In aperture priority, if I'm noticing that the camera is actually blowing out the shot a bit, I can just use the exposure compensation and just drop it down a bit. Or if it's a bit dark, I can use the exposure compensation and lift it up a little bit. But my histograms is very good. So I don't have any filters on here today. The only filter like you could use if you wanted to, like a 6-stop ND filter just to slow your shutter speed down a little bit, or a ND grad to darken the sky a bit if your foreground was quite dark. But today, no filters, no nothing. So we're just relying on it. So I framed the shot. I quite like that. Now, setting up the camera. Because we're going to be taking quite a lot of exposures, the camera needs to be on continuous shooting. If you've just let it on single, it's only going to take one photo. I like using just one of these intervalometers. They're quite cheap, $15 to $20 on eBay. All I do is when you set one of these up, it's the interval. You've got to have an interval. It can't just keep shooting one after the other, because you're just going to be taking a lot of photos. The minimum interval you really want for during the day is 6 seconds. Now, because this is, we're just doing like a tutorial today, I'm going to leave it on 6 seconds, and we're going to shoot around half an hour of photos. So it's going to give us about 10 to 15 seconds of movie. If I was going to be here for quite a lot longer and I wanted like to show half a day or 3 or 4 hours of time lapse, like because we're in the river, the tide's going to go up and down, I could actually extend that interval. So I could extend it to 10 or 15 seconds. Sometimes when I've been out and I've done a storm coming across, I might have started around a 12-second interval, and as the storm gets closer, I actually slow down the interval down maybe to 10 seconds, 8 seconds, or if we're shooting into a sunset, then I'm actually going to be bringing it down a bit so that I'm not missing too much of that beautiful golden hour light. During the day, 15 seconds is quite good because the day takes so long to get dark. So that's something that you actually have to think about too. But today we're going to set it at 6 seconds just for this. On most of these, you've got a couple of displays up the top. We have delay, long exposure, interval, then end for the amount of shots that you're going to take, and then like a little music symbol to show like whether you want the sound or not. So we leave the delay alone, we leave long exposure alone, and we want the interval. So we're going to set the interval to 6 seconds, yes. Now in the end, for the amount of photos you want to take, you can actually program these to the amount of photos that you want, but I find the best way is we set it to dash, which means it will keep taking photos until you say stop. This is the best way to do it. And the reason I do this also is because these are so cheap that they will last you a long time. But one of the things that I found that fail is this timer. You'll set it for, let's say, 200 photos, and you'll find it'll just do a countdown, and it won't be taking 200 photos. It just counts down. 1, 2, 3. Oh, I'll take a photo now. 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, I'll take a photo now. So they're a bit unreliable. So I find the easiest way is to set the dash, make a note of the time you start, and let's say you want to shoot for half an hour, 45 minutes. I'll look at my watch and I'll go like, okay, 10 to 10, at 20 past 10, I'll cut this off. So I find that this is the best way. So now we have the interval meter set up. It's plugged into our camera. Now the one thing, because it's a bit windy, what I do, I've got a little hockey strap here, just so it doesn't sort of hang down and puts pressure on the camera here. I actually use a little hockey strap and tie it down onto the camera. Now we'll do this, make sure we don't move the camera. So it's firmly set up down here, just below my hand here. You can probably just see the top of it here. Now we're ready to go. Because we're ready, I'm just going to take one more photo just to make sure that everything's okay. Now that's pretty good. Now my histogram is showing me that I'm right on the edge of the camera. So what I'm actually going to do is I'll bring the exposure down, exposure compensation down by 0.3. We'll take a photo. Now that's just dropped it down a little bit. I'd rather have a slightly underexposed photo than overexposed, because those clouds, there's actually quite a lot of white in there. I actually want some detail in those things. Let's see if I take it down another one, so that'll be 0.7 of an EV. That actually looks much better. What are we shooting at now? So now we're shooting at 1/500th of a second, f11. And the camera is going to take one photo every 6 seconds. Now, because we're going to be here for half an hour, we don't have to sit here. I've actually got a table behind me in the shade here. Once it starts, I'm just going to wait until I hear the camera cycle a couple of times. The last thing you want to do is just set it up and walk away and then realize that something's gone wrong with your interval meter. So we'll start it. We make sure that it's actually taking a couple of photos, and then we can just walk away from it. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention this. What I do, this is more important at night time than in the day, afternoon as well, but I actually take off the eyepiece here and I use one of these little things. That actually blocks out the light to your viewfinder. Now, most camera straps that you get from Nikon, Canon, all that, have got one of these on there. And if they don't, you can just buy these on eBay so cheaply. I normally buy a pack of 10 because I do workshops and all that, so I just give them away to students that are doing workshops. So this makes sure that I've actually got the sun right behind me here. So I don't want any sort of light hitting that viewfinder and affecting my camera. So walk one of these out. That looks pretty good. We'll set it up and run. There you go, it's taking a photo. Taking another one. Now, I'm actually going to stop this. Because I was doing a lot of tests on the camera and all that, a good thing to do, if you're not going to go through and delete them, I just put my hand over the camera without touching it, and I take a photo. What this does is it gives you a dark image. So you actually know where your time-lapse is going to start. Because if you've taken like half a dozen photos, you've actually got to make sure that you actually choose the right photo at the start. So now I've got the black screen. I'll actually start it now. So I know that all the photos before that dark photo, I can just delete because they're just test photos. There you go, it's cycling. I'm actually looking at this histogram here and it's telling me it's quite good. It's just to the right of halfway, so it's actually going to be very nice. So those clouds are slowly moving along. It's about 5 to 10. So we'll let this run for about 30 minutes. I'll whack them back. Now the camera's been going for just over half an hour. So we're actually going to shut the camera off here. I didn't say, but I've actually got the viewfinder, the screen on, so that I can actually see the photos that I've been taking. During the day I do this because if it changes dramatically, I can keep coming back here and all of a sudden, let's say if it gets very overcast, I can see whether my histogram has moved a bit. And if it's moved, I can use exposure compensation just to move it slightly. So I'm actually shooting at minus 0.7 of EV at the moment. So you can actually see, like at the moment, the clouds just come over the sun and it's just darkened my face a little bit. So if it gets too dark, I can actually just move the exposure compensation. But if I'm going to do this, then I'm only going to do it in gradual stages. But if the clouds are just coming and going, I'm just going to leave it alone, because in the time-lapse, that's actually going to look quite good, because it actually gives you reality that the clouds coming over, it gets a bit dark, and the clouds go away, it gets a bit brighter again. At night time though, I would actually shut off my rear screen. One, because it's so bright, and two, the sky's not going to change. I'm going to be shooting at a certain speed. I won't be using aperture priority. The camera will be in manual mode and the sky's dark. So if I'm shooting a Milky Way time-lapse, there's not going to be any movement in the image. So I keep my screen blacked out. So we're going to shut the camera off here and we'll go home and put these photos into Lightroom. That's it. I've just shut off the timer. We'll pack it all up, turn the camera off, unhook it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you when I'm back at my office.